Okay, hello. So on behalf of Piotr Piotrowski Center of Research on East Central European Art, I would like to welcome our guest, Mykola Rydnyi, who kindly agreed to take part in this meeting and who is one of the most interesting Ukrainian artists. I would like also like to thank students. Sorry, someone is going to join us. I would like also to thank students who took part in my lecture, Contemporary Belarusian and Ukrainian Art, for preparing this meeting. The meeting with Rydnyi is the first in a series of meetings with Ukrainian artists in the context of Russia's attack on Ukraine, which is being prepared by the Piotr Piotrowski Center. The series is titled Don't Get Used to Being Used, Don't Get Used to the War. And today's meeting is titled Blind Spot of the War. The title comes from the title of one of the artist's many works, Blind Spot of 2014, which advertises the event on Facebook and to which we will devote a lot of attention today. This is not the only, however, it is not the only work by the artist concerning Russia's military aggression on Ukraine, which was only officially acknowledged as war in February 2022. Apart from his strictly artistic activity, Rydnyi is also a filmmaker, curator, and author of essays on art and politics. He is a founding member of Soska Group, Kharkiv-based art collective formed in 2005. That same year, he co-founded the Soska Gallery Lab in central Kharkiv. The gallery lab was instrumental in the development of the artistic scene in the region. He curated a number of international exhibitions in Ukraine. I just want to mention after the victory exhibition, and he also sorry, another participant. He also is a co-editor of Prostory, an online magazine on visual arts, literature, and society. The first part of our meeting takes the form of a lecture prepared by the artist. Mykola, thank you for accepting our invitation. It's a pleasure to give you the floor.
Thank you, Magdalena, for this nice introduction, and I'm happy to be with you today and for this possibility to talk about my work and larger, I think, about the political context of our time and Ukraine, but also Poland. And as you already mentioned, one of my works, which is called The Blind Spot, I think I can start with this work because it's really played, first of all, it's played an important role in my artistic practice of the last years. But it's also the work which is still, it's a project which is still ongoing. So I started it in 2014, but somehow it was constantly updating during this last 8 years. So let me just share my my screen, but I need you to allow me to do that, I think.
Mm-hmm. Okay.
You can hear me, right?
Mm-hmm.
So now it's okay. All right. So in 2014, when this war started, And Crimea was the next, and the military action started in Donbass. I was invited to make the public art statement in Berlin, and of course, the war in Ukraine was the only thing which I was possible to think about to make such statement. And it became the work became a collaboration between me and Ukrainian artist, not artist, but the writer and the poet Serhiy Zhadan, who is from the same city as I am, from Kharkiv, on the very east of Ukraine. And I have to say that, have to mention that Serhiy Zhadan, when the invasion started recently this year, in 2022, he was and still in Kharkiv all this time, being involved in lots of volunteer activities and helping the people. While it's actually quite risky and dangerous to be there. All of my friends escaped the city, but
Okay.
the feeling which I had when that war started in 2014 was that following the media, you don't have actually any problem to be in a course of events. Circulation of images, and some of them were very shocking and violent, was really big. But that tended me to think about the role of accessibility to the images and media coverage of different wars and conflicts in the world, and that actually we live in a time of overloading with visual information regarding wars and conflicts, and unfortunately that doesn't create the situation when we could understand the events better or feel closer to them, because images are often manipulated. Media manipulate with images in order to put them in the propaganda machine. So that tend me to think about the idea of the blindness of the society, and its visual metaphor is implemented in this work, which I'm going to show you. So you see here on the images is the installation of this big black banner on the facade of the building, and in the middle of it there is a spot with the image of destroyed building in the region of Luhansk. But the way how everything is almost everything is covered with the black color, this effect is actually taken from the ophthalmology, the science of vision, and it's directly related to the idea of blindness, but not in metaphorical, not in let's say symbolical, but in very physical way. So when people has problems with the vision and certain disease of vision, the way how they lose the vision is occurring exactly in a similar way, like this spots when all the rest is disappearing. And on the ground level of the street, there was essay by Serhiy Zhadan about the case when separatists or Russians, it's still unknown, destroyed the regional museum in close to Luhansk. So the idea to put this banner was to bring an attention of international audience, and particularly those people who live in Berlin, to the problem of the war in Ukraine. And this banner also a little bit reminds something which is covering construction work or construction in the house. And that was the first main association of the people who were just passing by this place, by the street. But then when you stop, when you start to read the text on the ground level, look at the image, you understand that this is actually not the construction. It's not related to some local Berlin problems like gentrification, but it's the problem is much more serious, much more tragic. But this is also not the problem of the others, like the Ukrainians, but it's a common problem. This work was also exhibited in different forms. So I just showed you the version of public space, but it also exists as a series of images. So here you see these two types of images. One is similar to the one I previously showed you. It's just a selection of images showing the destruction of war and painted with black spray, black ink. But the other type of images showing the similar area, similar places. And this image is made before the war started, but they also covered with this black spots. So when you look at these two lines, two rows of these images, you start to have a feeling that actually, because of this coverage with the black, it's not so clear where is the war and where is the peace, because these images which were made before the war, it could be anything hidden behind this black spot, especially when you look at it together with some images of the destruction. This is just an installation view, how it was presented on the Venice Biennial in 2015 as a series of images. So these topics of our perception and our emotional reaction to the video, to the visual information, background with the political meanings, became a subject of my research for the number of works. Another one which I would like to show was made later in 2017, and it is called Gradual Loss of Vision. Actually, currently you can even see it in one of the exhibitions in Poland. It's presented in the Muzeum Sztuki in Łódź, at the exhibition of the collection of the museum which they have right now. So 2017, it was already the time when the attention of the world and international media to the war in Ukraine radically changed. Although the war was not finished, it's just changed its format, and after Minsk agreements were signed, it shifted to so-called frozen phase. But in fact, it was never frozen, and there was always a tension and shooting on the artificial border between Ukraine and self-proclaimed republics. And some people, like mainly soldiers, but sometimes some civilians were also dying. That was happening almost every day. But we have to understand and underline this problem that the logic of TV news and the logic of how information appear in the media is actually very bloody logic, because I think since 1990s, if not earlier, we can say that the TV news is basically the news of violence, and that was always the main topic. Yeah, and times changed and different events started happening in the world. The war in Syria appeared, and the war in Ukraine became just less sensational. So in this work, you see these shapes of disputed territories, not only in Ukraine, like this is Crimea, and this is the shape of self-proclaimed Donetsk and Lugansk People's Republics. And this is not the bad internet connection, but these images are really out of focus. So they are not sharp. Here is also, for instance, Transnistria, the region which has started to be discussed again when this large-scale invasion started this year, or Abkhazia and South Ossetia. So all the disputed regions of the post-Soviet area of the world, and why they are depicted like being taken out from the rest of lands on the map and being out of focus, because for me this is exactly the symbol of this disappearance from the world's attention. These territories became literally out of focus. They became unseen. And the digital collage, which also I think the right parallel would be with a image with of let's say Google Map, but with a weak internet connection. This actually the background color is not really white, but is a bit gray and yellow. It's taken exactly from the from the Google Maps. This number of images were shown together with this kind of notes related to different aspects of human vision. So this drawings is saying about exercises for the eyes. This one compares the map of roads around Donetsk city and structure of the yeah, and maybe the newest work connected with the aspects of human vision. It's called Speck in the Eye. So you see these images which looks quite almost like abstract painting, very colorful, beautiful in a way, but at the same time there is something yeah, sorry. Okay, so yeah, as I said, this images reminds abstract painting, but in fact they are actually not. They are something very, very different. This colorful, semi-abstract graphic image is actually shows the structure of the eye, and in each case, it's a damaged eye. Mm-hmm. The eye to which certain foreign body trapped in. And this is the images which I did by myself in the medical laboratory. So this is the digital images made with a microscope. And another type of the images which you see on the right are the found footage from different protests took place all over the world. In media called them the blind protests, which I don't think really a good title, but there is a reason. There is a reason for that. So in each case, the protests in very different countries, including Chile or Hong Kong or Kashmir or France.
Egypt as well, yeah, because there was a protester in Egypt who lost his both eyes, shot with a rubber bullet, and they were wearing patches on the eyes, yeah. So Arab Spring, yeah.
Exactly, yeah, that was also included in this series, and particularly the case which you mentioned. So in all of these cases, there was abuse of power and the brutal violence, mainly from the side of the police and militants towards the protesters. But the protesters, yeah, and as a result of that, some of the protesters lose their eyes. They lose the vision, literally. And lots of people decided to support them and to do it in a very creative way, organizing flash mobs and wearing eye patches, or drawing, like on this image, you can see this posters with the eye. But not only on the street, in some cases. This is the image from Georgia, when also the young journalists lost her eye as a result of the aggression of the police, but not only on the street, but also during broadcasting of the TV channels, and also in the social networks. So this work will exist of these photographic collages, but also the audio part made in the form of radio broadcasting, delivering the news about this very different cases. Yeah, and now is it changed again to my website? I just want to be sure. Yeah.
Not yet. Not yet. Mm-hmm.
Yeah. So this is the video work made in. This is the video work made in 2014 and 2015, which I actually updated very recently. So because 1 month ago, I visited Kharkiv, my hometown, where I'm not living anymore because for the last 5 years, I'm based in Kiev. And now actually I'm talking with you from Berlin, but this is another story, and we can we can talk about this. Yeah, about the aspects of my traveling later, if you like. But yeah, 1 month ago I visited Kharkiv. There was a moment when it was relatively safe to go there. Now I would not risk because the city started to be shelled by Russian artillery again and again. Yeah, so this work from 2015 was related to the tensions, political tensions in the city, also closely connected with brutal street violence when there was a conflict between, let's say, pro-Ukrainian activists and pro-Russian separatists. With related acts of capture of the administration building of the city and massive fights around that place. I think you can still find some videos, amateur videos documenting that in the YouTube. And I worked with that videos in a way that I took only sound part from them. First of all, because the brutality, I mean, of course, now when we have this disaster of full-scale war, that type of street violence seems to be not serious compared to this. But going back into 2014, that was actually quite shaking and even shocking, because on my memories and my life experience, Kharkiv was always a peaceful city, and there was no conflicts there before. Maybe since 1991, when there was some manifestations for independence of Ukraine. But anyway, first of all, I didn't want to show, to include that brutal footage in my work, because I always question myself how to talk about violence and the problem of violence without reproducing it in your work. Yeah, so what I did, I left only sound from the videos, and I filmed that particular places in the city center of Kharkiv later, when the situation already calmed down. So it looks like a normal everyday life, even a bit boring. People walking with kids, riding the bicycle, and then that the brutal sound is breaking this normal, let's say, the image of normal life as some kind of a ghost voice of the space. But as one Polish film critic whose name Jakub Majmurek wrote in his essay about this work, that in the case of Kharkiv and in relation to this work, you cannot be really sure that past is already past and that it will not reappear again and became the present, or even the present, which can change the future. And this is exactly what happened with the city in 2022, because when Russia attacked Ukraine, Kharkiv was one of the first places under direct hit, because geographically it's located very close to the Russian border, and the artillery shelling started already in the first hours of the attack. So maybe at this point, I think it would be good to from the film. What do you think, Magdalena?
Yes, I agree.
Okay. you will see exactly the final chapters of the work.
Mhm.
It's with English subtitles. I hope it will be visible.
Mhm.
Митинг класс. О! Воня!
Ой,
Снимай,
боже,
снимай.
почти стреляют уже, тише.
Да дед упал, сейчас деда врыло. Это правильно, Миша. Егор, а этих нет?
Ой, ужас.
Ох, красавцы наши.
На камнями кидаются. Ой, боже, да побежи окна
Ну,
люди.
одному дали. О, бьют, правильно.
Мгм.
Мочите тебе. Мочи, козла.
Да.
Убейте его, собаку русскую.
Да если бы он русский был.
О, бить. Вот это он еще. О!
Родились, скоты родились и выросли
Это
здесь.
наш металл.
Металл не... О!
Ой, боже, ой, боже, ой, боже.
Красавцы.
Ой, ужас, ой, ужас. Да много, глянь. Ой.
Молодцы. Кого ублюдка еще? Телки попрятались. Уж только что такие герои
Ага.
стали за подъезд.
Можно выкрикнуть славу Украине? Тут
Не
уже
надо,
наша-
Егор, не надо, побьют нам окна.
Да.
Толку-то никакого от этого, а нам побьют окна.
So I don't know, I hope it was visible well and you would be able to hear the sound, which is very important for this work. Yeah, I mean, I can add as my comment to it only that probably, as you mentioned, the first part, so the episode which was made in 2015, connected with this, with the background sound, which is the dialogue of the people discussing the violent events they observe from their window, and the video is showing the same street where the apartment was located, and the discussion is very emotional, but it also has this elements of discussion about civil conflict, while in the last chapters, last chapter is a speechless, so there is nothing what you can add to that as a comment. It's just the sound which block our ability to hear, similar to the effect caused by the explosion of the bomb or the rocket. And yeah, it's showing the same places, so there is more public spaces in this film, and it's showing many of them in a completely damaged, destroyed condition. So I think this video is a good, maybe the good point to finish my presentation, because it's related to the very current and ongoing events. And now we can, I would be happy to hear your questions and answer to them.
Thank you very much. And especially thank you for showing us and sharing with us this updated version of regular places. That was really interesting and really overwhelming experience, especially with that bomb after sound effect that you added. And I think that that really is interesting effect that impacts on the viewers to leave us somehow also speechless, because the narrative which is produced that we discuss during our classes is really sometimes harmful for perception of that war. And now I'm going to ask the first person to ask the question.
Yeah, so I will read what Claudia sent me as her interpretation, her comment on shelter. I have it here. So
maybe before you read it, I'm going to show a part of the shelter work by Mykola Rydnyi that was recently exhibited and still is on show in Wolfgang Museum in Essen, within the exhibition Visions of Ukraine, which is really interesting by itself. So sorry, but before you read it, I'm going to share my screen and show a part of that work.
Помещение было раньше как раздевалка использовалось. Затем это помещение использовалось для хранения ненужных вещей, стенды валялись и прочее, прочее. А потом, когда возник вопрос о том, что в школе нужен тир, я очистил это помещение, сделал. То помещение, в котором вы сейчас находитесь, это относится к противорационным укрытиям. Так вот, к коллективным средствам защиты относятся 3 разновидности инженерных сооружений. Это первый, самый основной, это убежище. Второй – противорадиационное укрытие. И последний – простейшее укрытие. Убежище – это инженерное сооружение, которое защищает укрывающееся в них население от поражающих факторов ядерного оружия, химического оружия, бактериологического оружия, а также высоких температур и вредных газов, которые образуются при пожарах. Кроме этого, в самом убежище должна быть комната для помещения населения. Комната должна быть оборудована стульями, скамьями, лежаками, для того, чтобы взрослое население так может сидеть, больные могут лежать, дети могут лежать. Должно быть оборудовано. В этой же комнате оборудуется пост, который контролирует поведение населения, укрывшегося в убежище населения. Если основной вход-выход завален разрушенными зданиями, то и должен быть запасной выход, чтобы население, которое укрывается в убежище, могло выйти. Убежище в настоящее время сейчас убежище в городе Харькове не строятся. А те, которые были построены, они остались, законсервированы, остались. Почему? Потому что строится метро, которое является убежищем высшего класса, первого класса, так, которые в случае необходимости население может укрываться в убежищах метро. Я в этой школе после службы в армии работаю с 3 мая 1977 года. В Советском Союзе назывался предмет допризывная подготовка. Так? А в нашей школе была этот предмет начали изучать с 1971 года. Так? Ну, а потом, уже тогда, когда наша страна, Украина, стала самостоятельным государством, предмет стал называться захист вітчизни, защита Отечества. Цель и задача – подготовка учащихся к службе в вооруженных силах, подготовка учащихся к тому, чтобы они могли защищать свое Отечество, то есть Украину защищать в случае необходимости. Далее, привитие им патриотических чувств по отношению к своей родине, так, чувство сопереживания со своим народом. Вот это основные задачи данного предмета.
Okay, so I'm just going to mention that that work was created in 2012, and that it problematizes the new acquired meaning to the phenomenon of the shelters, and the very idea reaches to the Cold War. But now they kind of are equipped with new meaning and new meaning. They were equipped with a new meaning when the video was produced, but recently, after February of 2020, almost 10 years after the creation of the video, they were converted back into the original function. Okay, so please, now we can hear the question.
Okay, so one of the first thoughts that came to my mind was a generational difference when it comes to approaching guns and patriotism. The older man has strong feelings about prospecting his country. He seems to be living in constant alertness caused by his experience and perhaps even his parents' experience. I am thinking about the First and Second World War and the trauma it caused. Younger people were raised in a completely different world, capitalism and consumerism, which means gun propaganda, both in culture and in some countries caused by political movements. Therefore, we can see two generations and their different approaches to the topic. Shelter, in my opinion, is a very interesting picture that shows these differences. What's also very interesting is the setting. There is an underground bunker that was rearranged for pre-military training space for young people. I think that given space a different meaning, without completely covering the marks of its previous form, is very meaningful, especially because it used to be a bunker. I think that this speaks louder than the word. It is strong proof of a constant awareness that people used to live with. I think that today's shelter has a different meaning due to a war in Ukraine, because it became more real and more current than it was only a few years ago. Gun violence is a huge problem on the west side of this world, the USA. But now using guns is something inevitable for the Ukrainian people. And that's all. Thank you.
Thank you very much. So I would like now to tell more about the way that we discussed conflict between, initially named as conflict between Russia and Ukraine. In its origins, namely from around the time that you created that video, 2012, first in the context of financial crisis on 2008 and the gas crisis that appeared as such in the Ukraine. So also in the context of Arab Spring, Occupy Wall Street, and those kind of movements. And later, also in the context of something that strikes me within the theoretical approaches towards first the conflict and now the war, which is really problematic. Namely, originally it were texts written by Zizek, who kind of recently published very controversial texts on the war. But at first, he just emphasized the problems with a binary vision of that situation. And I would like to address this problem by referring to your work, Blind Spots. To me, it does not only represent the blindness of the society, as you refer to it, but also, you know, and you mentioned in your text that this blind spot is the effect of that two-eyed vision, and is also created as something that is missing when we transform the vision, the perception of left and right eye into the three-dimensional vision. So I would say that to me, what is problematic is this binary narrative that is also stressed in the text by Badiou and Zizek, the binary alternative that is presented to us, that it's either Putin for Ukraine, yeah, and Russia, dependence on Russia, or dependence, let's say, on the EU and the Western narrative, Western hegemony. And to me, and then I would like to present my interpretation of your work and then ask the question to you, how would you find this, not my interpretation, but that, how would you relate to the problem of this false binarity of the situation that is presented especially by West? Because what I would like to emphasize that, of course, we see how the Putin's narrative is being created, yeah, that with the reference to Cold War, yeah, and he is abusing the notion of the West as an enemy of Russia, who is the savior of the world, yeah. But this is also, especially if you staying now in Berlin, you experience that narrative is really close to a leftist forces in so-called West, especially among German people, that really they insist on this previously perceived as only Cold War binary vision of the world, yeah. And there's, I would say that also the West, so-called West, is abusing this Cold War narrative. So what we experience is a kind of a shock, yeah, that we came back to this binary vision vision that is somehow regulated by the Cold War binary situation. And I would like to present a little bit from my reflection on the blind spot, the work of yours. And to start with this very insightful critique of the binary that seems post-Cold War model was offered during a series of seminars, Les Manins de Vérités, delivered in 2013-2014 by Alain Badiou. The French philosopher proves that the figure of the reduction to finiteness and the attendant exclusion of the infinite from the possible set of the horizons of humanity is currently, and I quote, basic figure of oppression. Badiou criticizes a narrative with which pits Ukraine's pursuit of association with Europe as a guarantee of freedom against Putin's despotism and frames it by means of static contradictions. According to Badiou, the acknowledgement of the oppositions leads to a conclusion that the uprising in Ukraine is static, since it was, the text was still about uprising, since, and I quote, it strives to accomplish what previously existed, that is a democratic, free Europe, end of quote. The philosopher goes on to indicate, however, that Ukraine was the least of Europe's concerns. In fact, Europe wishes to see Maidan as legitimizing its own value, paid for by so many human lives. The trap of entanglement in the binary post-Cold War oppositions of the Kremlin and Europe can be lifted with the gesture of Badiou, the realization that, I quote, the West is only a polite name for the hegemony of global capitalism, end of quote. The same realization is at the foundation of the political system in Russia. In the philosopher's opinion, the solution to the problem is not only a criticism of capitalism, but also demands that breaks this hegemony formulated not only for oneself, but also for others, demands that can be found partly in the art of Ukrainian artists, which evades the conceptual hegemony of capitalism and some stagnant binary structure. And I would like to see the Badiou text as a key for interpretation of your work. So Badiou text is a key for interpretation of art created as a commentary to the 2014 political events in Ukraine and the situation leading to those events. These works play in a rather subtle way in the historical political context without using the post-Cold War opposition of the West and Russia. They should be seen as an artistic commentary on the protracted transformation or transition, which of necessity delayed, evades the simplifications to which other countries of Central and Eastern Europe were doomed. Particularly noteworthy are those works which, while accompanying political events, inscribe the emergent subject historically rooted in the Orange Revolution, in the discourse of the country's communist past, but do so in extremely subtle way that disregards both simplifications and requisite summary. By far the most significant work that addresses both the discursive impasse and the threat of war is Mykola Rydnyi's series titled Blind Spot. As the author himself has it, the title refers to the blind spot located in the field of vision between right and left eye. The language of description, which does not accurately reflect the essence of the phenomenon, reveals the intention of the artist, the creation of the work that lays bare the impossibility of recording two discursive formations represented by the figure of the left and right eye, which make up the bipartite nature of social vision. The artist mentions that due to the existence of blind spots, each image has a status of construction of reality, which, however, we are unaware of. Rydnyi indicates that, I quote, an exception to this rule is the state of disease, in which the blind spot is visible and takes the shape of a darkness that absorbs the reality, end of quote. As the artist points out, in the social context, this is a quote, this inability to see is also like a human self-defense mechanism that produces voluntary blindness against escalating violence, end of quote. The artist's work consists of series of acrylics on color photographic prints depicting buildings in Ukrainian border town of Luhansk, destroyed during the seizure of the city by pro-Russian separatists in April 2014. Rydnyi blackens them with acrylic paint and spray so that in some of the works, this black spot is proper subject of representation, leaving only narrow margins of photographs to the viewer's perception. The second part of the series consists of the other photographs, blackened the negative fashion in relation to the first one, in which only circular fragments of the image are saved from the process of blackening. Here too, the real object of artistic creation is the eponymous blind spot, a disturbance and disruption of the vision rather than what has been saved. What is saved from the photograph is at the same time what was destroyed in the course of political events, building facades and the streets surfaces charred by fire, defragmented and ruined. They have a status of fosters real. Therefore, regular praises trigger questions about possibility of construction of a society conscious of its own diversity and limitation of fields of vision as social narratives. Rydnyi vision is one of discourses which never meet and which strive for omnipotence and inability, namely those two discourses of Russia versus West. They may result in yet another form of blindness that, quote Rydnyi, imposed by the war propaganda machine producing a binary vision of reality. And Boris Buden recently wrote a text that Pan Jan is going to elaborate later. And he argues in his text entitled West on War, on the self-enclosure of liberal mind, written in April 2022, that miserable reality of the war in Ukraine has very quickly found its equivalent in the cognitive misery of its liberal representation in Western publics. According to Buden, the Ukrainians, against their will, have been forced into the war and must now fight it, but not only for themselves. They must fight a proxy war for the West. The war in Ukraine has become a proxy war between two imagined adversaries, the West and Putin. And I would like to ask you, Mykola, what do you think of this, to framing your work within this this kind of alternative to the binarity? Because to me, I'm a kind of, you know, I frame my work within Marxism. And to me, I'm really more prone, and your work I perceive as prone to particular dialectics, escaping both the condemnation towards Putin and Russia, but also escaping the hegemony of West somehow. What do you think?
Yeah, thanks for this large comment or even essay you read about my work. Yeah, I have a few points to say. First of all, I think we have a deal with two different wars in 2014 and 2022. Also different in terms of ideological and political discourse of how it framed. because what was happening in 2014 and how, let's say, Russia was trying to argue their aggressive actions was the frame of a hybrid conflict.
Mm-hmm.
So Russian point was actually that this is the civil war in Ukraine, and they are just supporting Russian speaking population or Russian minority, whatever, from their side, and this is the way how they were trying to legitimize this war and, like, let's say, to sell this version to the West. Mm-hmm. Which was actually very convincing for many people and on the West as well. What we have in 2022 is completely different because for everyone, I think it's clear that this is just an open aggression and full-scale invasion to the other country, which has a purely imperialistic nature. Yeah, and talking about the binary vision rooted in the Cold War paradigm or type of relationships between, this is also for me, these relationships are very imperialistic too. It's communication between two empires, which was Soviet Union, in fact, through it. Then it started to restore the imperialistic patterns, and the United States, of course. But for me, like this logic to talk about this war today from the perspective of two monsters, let's say, fighting each other or being in competition with each other, where Ukraine is just a victim or it was involved or used by one of the sides, is problematic. And I also feel problematic with the text by Boris Budin, which I also recently read, because in a way, also
I think we have some disruption here. Okay.
Yeah, I said that I don't feel like the Boris Budin is has a sympathy to Putin, but the text is written from the position of this binary logic as well. And what is the biggest problem in this? That in this discourse there are no place for Ukraine as independent subject and sovereign. While this role is, of course, it's important for the whole world, it's important for Europe, but it's most of all important for Ukraine, because it's just a question of survival of Ukraine as an independent country, and country which can stay or not. For Ukraine, it's a question in which shape, in which borders Ukraine is gonna stay, and also what will happen with the people who are now in the occupied territories, because the scale of occupied territories is uncomparable to 2014. Now it's much more.
Mm-hmm. I mean, in my opinion, it is like that Ukraine is literally the blind spot. It's something that it's being overlooked within those kind of binary two narratives, Putin versus West, yeah, and Ukraine is placed within the place of the blind spot. like, you know, not overlooked, no existence. It doesn't really count in those narratives. Okay,
Yeah,
thank
exactly.
you.
Yeah, I just think that we have to look at any situation, like any political conflict in the world, but particularly this one we are discussing right now, in all its complexity, because of course there is a big countries with imperialistic ambitions, and they have own relationships and yeah, competition and fight, but it's not the only perspective from which we had to look at the situation, and it's also very unfair perspective, because the victim in this situation is Ukraine, and I think it's very important to talk from the position of the victim.
Mm-hmm. Yes, yes. Thank you very much for this. And now I believe Pan Jan is going to tell us, Pan Jan Kalicki, about Budyń more. Yes?
Yeah, but my question is already
answered.
Yeah, but still I have a little question. Boris Budyń mentioned in text points out that war in Ukraine is proxy war between the West and Putin, I was mentioned, but also point out that war in Ukraine is a result of the binary division that arose during the Cold War. The thesis and the conclusion of the mentioned author is the need for revolution which breaks this binary division. That shows author belief in the historical potential of revolution, which in the opinion of Budyń bring in the past ends of the wars. Despite criticism of the West and its imperialism, Budyń points to the need for revolutionary changes in Russia, which in his utopian vision should begin in Ukraine. In the context of your work, like blind spots or the back in the eye, don't you have the impression that Budyń and the West, which he criticized, do not notice the proxy wars between West and Putin starts a long time ago? For example, every liberation revolution in 21st century, I think here about Euromaidan in Ukraine and Arab Spring and other revolutions, which they broke the Cold War division, later transforming into mentioned proxy war between West and Putin, where they fighting for the influence and interest. Do you think we are, or West is blind for the fact that not only imperialism of Putin, but also of the West are still trying to restore the Cold War power, or maybe that binary division never ends and we have next chapter of silence Cold War? Thank you.
Yeah, thank you for the question. Well, first of all, maybe I would comment on this point about revolution, which is in the end of Boris' text. I think it's a bit naive and very utopian, and it's also related to this dreaming, constant dreaming, and relying on the experience of a Russian Revolution of 1917, which is absolutely not up to date, I think. We live in different times, and the situation in Russia is very far from being close to revolutionary condition, or where some kind of revolution may happen. But my point is that actually it's Ukrainian people who are doing a revolution at this particular moment. So I would say for the Ukrainian society, this is not just a war. This is in a way a revolution, because it demonstrates similar social dynamics, which could happened during the revolution, which is a big level of unity and solidarity between people. And I think only the result, and the term of victory is problematic for me talking about this war, because you know, everyone has a own vision and understanding of the term of victory. But anyway, as much effective reaction will be done from Ukrainian side and from Ukrainian military towards Russian army. Biggest effect it will cause to the whole construction of Russian society and stability of Putin's regime. So this is why it's not so much depends on Russian opposition, which is completely crushed at this particular moment. It's basically all the opponents of the regime or those who disagree, they all live in the country at the moment. And yeah, but this is the Ukrainian people who are able to change also not our own future, but also the future of Russia is where it depends on how Ukraine will proceed in this war. And of course, yes, of course, Ukraine is not fighting alone. There are international allies, which is Europe, still kind of very slow in their support, and United States. And I mean, this idea to renew the Cold War discourse was already visible in Putin's speeches since 2008. The very significant case is his speech on the Munich conference in 2008, and it was the same year when the war in Georgia started, by the way. So it was already there, while for United States, to me, it looks more like a reaction, which was demonstrated only recently. So it was not the discourse, and it was not the system of rules, let's say, coming from the side of the West. That was Putin who evoked it, let's say, and in a way he involved West in this game, I would say. But then what is the another choice? There are no other choice. We see another approach from we've seen another approach from European politicians last years, and it was just showing the weakness of their position based on the idea that Putin is like other politicians, can be negotiable, that the diplomatic way of communication can work with him, and that was totally wrong. For us, like for Ukrainians, it was clear already back in 2014, but for Europe, it seems that it became clear only now when lots of people died.
Yeah, I would say that probably from Putin's side, that naive idea of revolution that is also naively close to my heart is some escape both from Putin, from hegemony of the West and of capitalism, and also from escape from nationalism, because it's, you know, for instance, when Poland supports Ukraine by heart, and both both actors on political scene support Ukraine, both far-rightist forces, because they kind of can relate to the hidden nationalist discourse that it's, you know, not exposed right now, but it's kind of, they project it onto this the Ukrainian part of the war, but also left that support towards totally different attitude, yeah, and that's kind of more give more financial support or class support to that. I would like to organize the next event within the series that will discuss financial abuse of political refugees from Ukraine that takes place, yeah, and also I would say using them as a cheap labor, that it's not addressed right now because probably most people think that it's not time for addressing that issue. But since it has been half a year we are dealing with that war, it's becoming more and more relevant right now. Pan Jan, do you want to add something to your comment?
The only one technical mention that actually there are not so many time left as I can be with you, because I have another Zoom at 1 o'clock. It's only 20 minutes left.
Okay, so then we need to accelerate our questions, okay? And then Pani Anna Jackowska?
Okay, so actually I was supposed to briefly present the work called The Gradual Loss of Vision. And this is a series of drawings and notes in pen on paper. It consists of 6 pieces and was made in 2017. And like it was already said, this was inspired by the fact of how self-proclaimed republics in Ukraine were overlooked by the world media when the conflict there relatively calmed down. And this situation this type of situation is a phenomenon characteristic not only to Ukraine, but it is also a problem that concerns different territories around the world. And here in the presented work of Mykola Rydnyi, described situation is shown in broader global context, because gradual loss of vision consists of topographic images of Crimea, Donetsk and Luhansk People's Republics, Transnistria, Abkhazia and South Ossetia, but they are blurred and out of focus, which shows in a literal way how they gradually became unimportant to the world media. And it is actually a quite common mechanism that can be seen in the media, that after some time, the tragic events and important conflicts are somehow ignored, meaning the parts of the world and viewers that are not directly involved in such conflicts slowly get used to the horrid images shown, and unusual situations are considered normal. And in this work, the geographic images of Crimea, Donetsk and Luhansk People's Republics, Transnistria, Abkhazia and South Ossetia are juxtaposed in a very interesting way with medical drawings and schemes concerning eyes and vision. And first one of such drawings is an instruction for eye exercises. And another one shows changes of peripheral vision caused by glaucoma. And this one is very fascinating because of the fact that an eye depicted here looks exactly like a globe covered with longitudes and latitudes. And this is very compelling, taking into account the meaning of this work and how in this context it is connected with the geographical schemes that are also a part of the series. And another drawing depicts a human eye with its vascular system. And this is juxtaposed with the scheme of the roads around the city of Donetsk, which also is very compelling because the lines of roads look similar to veins surrounding an eye. And that is all. Thank you for your attention.
Thank you for that comment. And now yes, you would like to, no, you don't like to add something. So now we have another comment coming from Pani Edyta. Yes.
Yes, I have a small comment referring to this older version of regular places. In this work, we see a series of shots from a statically positioned camera showing the streets of Kharkiv. Not much is actually happening. People are sitting on park benches, talking on the phone, going their separate ways, immersed in daily routine. Some spaces are instead quite depopulated. The atmosphere is calm and the weather seems warm. Contrasted with this image is the soundtrack full of screams, sounds of violence, aggression. In fact, the video was made a few months after the protests against the annexation of Crimea, which was met with military aggression. We hear documentary recordings of the sounds of these events, which happened not much earlier in exactly the same places. The viewer can see people relaxing in the park, but at the same time hear the words, "They beat the boys," or repeated several times on your knees, with a view of an empty sunny street. The work is strongly literal and evocative. Initially, I found it difficult to say anything more about it because I thought it spoke for itself. The contrast between the sounds signifying human violence, evoking fear, and this automatic feeling of disagreement and opposition to the situation, and the neutral image with citizens walking here and there is very striking, and it is received more emotionally than intellectually. Regular places reminds me of the tradition of post-war photography, such as Post He Writes Hidden from 2002, showing traces of the war in the space where military action took place. Here, however, we have traces not of the visual, as in the photograph, but of the soundtrack. It is only the artist's responsibility to contrast the sound historical document of military operations with the later urban landscape. They're not really connected, at least in a literal sense. I think also about the fact that this scary soundtrack can exist in the minds of people who a few months ago feared for their lives and loved ones. After all, the memories are still fresh, even though the citizens have had to return to their daily lives and behave as if nothing had happened. It must be especially difficult when you're still living in a space where traumatic events have occurred. Specific places evoke specific memories and emotions. The space is no longer energetically neutral. Mykola Rydnyi's work confronts the viewer with the painful gap between dramatic political events and the return to everyday life, a challenge faced by anyone who has experienced it. Viewed today, it can be seen as prophetic in the context of the war, and will also be very topical afterwards when people have to deal with the post-war trauma. Thank you.
Thank you. So then you can see how it goes when, Mykola, that we have discussions over your works of art during our classes. So it's a kind of a preview of this analytical discussion. So it might be interested to you. And now I'd like to ask Pani Anna Małaczyńska to address that next issue. Hello.
Yes, I'd like to say a little about another artwork, Wrong Connection, which refers to a problem of post-Soviet and European political differences, which are causing problems on different levels. And in this artwork, it was shown these all problems on the example of problematic rail standards, which are different in both types of mentioned countries. And so a race as an installation put in front of City Hall in Lublin can come to stand in for political obstacle. At the same time, they also become a real obstacle in the most pedestrian sense. And the artistic sense of it was to give a question, does the agreement and connection between these countries in different areas is really possible, or is it possible only on a formal level rather than on the level of real openness to people's demands? And because problem of mentioned rail standards is still an issue, and in a way of ritual when the train's wheels are changed day by day, is still forcing people of different countries to anxiously wait without ideas which have been taken by the border service for a couple of hours, and the main gesture in this installation alludes to the idea that over the last 20 years, since one important in this subject documentary film of director Lozinski, to which this installation refers, not so much has changed in the relations between West and East. And so referring to this, my question is this artwork, after nearly 10 years from making it, still actual, or maybe even gained on its meaning right now? We'd be really pleased to know more about it, especially that this installation was made here in Poland, and what's more, after nearly 10 years, and because of political problems, especially in Ukraine right now, a lot could have changed. Yes, thank you.
Okay.
Reactualization. Thanks for this reactualization of this very old work, Wrong Connection, which was made a site-specific installation in Lublin for the Open City Festival. Yeah, actually, I had the feeling at certain point, I had the feeling that the work lost its context because trains became not so important at certain points. So people start to use flights a lot, and like low costs, and not only from Kiev, but before the war started in 2014, there was even direct flights to Warsaw from Kharkiv, from my hometown, and some other regional centers. And at the same time, people from Ukraine who had problems with money, like labor migrants, they were preferring buses and still not trains. So somehow trains and this rail difference was the issue which was lost in time. But now actually the situation changed, because as we are at war, there are no flights between
Okay, I think it stopped. Mm-hmm.
I was just saying that now trains became very important again for the transportation in the times of emergency, but actually it's really difficult to find, there are almost no direct trains. So, and this is also connected with this issue of different railway standards. So you just need to go to the places like Przemysl or Helm, and then just change the train, which already stands on another track to go further in Poland.
Okay, thank you very much. And now Pani Monika Czyżniewska.
Yes, hello, hi. I would like to make a comment which somehow is referring to what have been already said, and then ask you a question. So Russian-Ukrainian war, in fact, has been going since annexation of Crimea by Russia in 2014. And in this year, Russia decided to invade Ukraine, bringing entire world's eyes to the conflict. I think it somehow reminded us of binary opposition between West and Russia, and even awakened the Cold War atmosphere with nuclear threats. When conflict escalated, many were wondering how to interpret this war and motives behind it. So I would like to refer to some thoughts about it. So-called West has been helping Ukraine with military aid and humanitarian aid, but refused to take direct military action, referring to it as a possible escalation to the war. However, NATO decided to send humanitarian military to the Kosovo War in 1999 and later to Afghanistan War, for example. And it seems that West is acting this time too late, or it's acting in
it's somehow incapable to act ahead, often focusing on symptoms, not the root causes of the conflict. Because let's not forget that Russian military was sent to the border with Ukraine at the end of 2021, months before invasion happened, and many dismiss it as a false threat. When it comes to Putin, it seems like he's trying to build a regime based on caricature of the past. Russian identity is based on rejection of anything Western and preserving traditional values that have, in his rhetoric, evaporated in the West. It can be linked to the myth of the Great Patriotic War, a propaganda term used to describe the Second World War when Soviet Union joined anti-fascist coalition. And in nowadays war between Russia and Ukraine, we can hear that for Russia, it isn't a war, but the militarization or the Nazification of Ukraine, which shows that this terminology is still rooted in the past. And it seems like Putin is working against time, desperately trying to destroy any alternative to his regime that have been created on empty myths of past and former Soviet Union. In this case, we can look at this war as a war between two worlds: democratic West, where Ukraine belongs since Maidan Revolution in 2014, and fascist Russia. And there is my question. How do you feel about this interpretation? Would you agree, or rather, because your view as a Ukrainian person might be completely different? And I think you already referred to it and this binary opposition in narrative as a problematic for you because it doesn't make room for complex and complicated status of Ukraine.
And I would like to add that it was based on the reading of the text of Vasil Cherepanin that we read during our classes. So that reflection.
Yeah, I mean, Putin has also said in one of his speeches that he will not allow Ukraine to be anti-Russia. So the country which is completely ideologically, politically different from Russia, or Belarus, another country which stands in a similar conservative authoritarian mode as well as Russian Federation, but in fact, all of his actions or actions of Russian authorities lead to the very opposite. So as long as this war continues, as a stronger Ukrainian society wants to be segregated from Russia, and it's not just it's not a nationalistic issue, but it's an issue of I think certain values and another order.
Okay, thank you very much. And the question from or a comment from Pani Magdalena.
Okay, so now I will tell you a little bit about the authorities from 2009 with inscription blast, which translates to power, but also a force. And knowing what this work is, I perceive authorities as an art piece that can go beyond the national dimension and be compared to the political situations in other countries in Eastern Europe. And after all that has been said, I think I know the answer, but my question is, do you think that meaning of authorities can extend beyond the Ukrainian dimension and we can relate authorities to Eastern Europe political situation, generally speaking? Thank you.
Yeah, I mean, I think I didn't really get the question. There was also some trouble with the connection.
Okay. Yeah, please.
Do you think that meaning of authorities can extend beyond the Ukrainian dimension, and we can relate authorities to Eastern Europe political situation, generally speaking? Because I saw you are also referring to Georgia, and I'm interested in that.
Yeah, also thank you for showing this, the image of the work. I mean, the work was done in Russia, so it was first of all related to the Russian situation, but basically the danger of rise of the authoritarian regime elsewhere. Yeah, I mean, this is the danger for any country. I mean, I hope, I think and I hope that Ukraine is fighting for democratic values, but these values actually been very questioned in Europe and Eastern Europe in particular, with the current course of such countries like Hungary, but also, I mean, Polish government showing solidarity with Ukraine recently, but this is also very conservative government, and I think you all know better than me about all the problems existing in Poland at the moment.
Unfortunately, too well. Thank you very much, Mykola. I know that you are going to rush to another meeting right now. Then thank you for spending your time with us. We are going to continue, if you don't mind, with reflections upon your work of art and our meeting. I am really happy that we could talk and we could hear out your fantastic presentation about your work, and thank you for everything that you do for us and for people who are who really care about Ukraine and Ukrainian art. We cross our fingers for the war to be terminated and for Putin to be condemned and for the world to be free from this awful war that affects us all. Of course, the most Ukrainian people. We cannot compare our sufferings to that, but in a way, it affected our worldview, and it's really the event that we would like to stop as soon as possible. Thank you so much.
Thank you too. Yeah, it was nice to be with you these 2 hours, and yeah, I was really amazed by your statements and comments about my work. It was really nice to hear.
Thank you, and
Thank you.
Let's be in touch.
Let's be in touch, and bye to all of you.
Goodbye. Bye.